Do you have any idea what these people go through? Clint Eastwood's voice cut through the air like a knife. His eyes, cold and penetrating, never left the manager's pale face. I didn't build this empire for the likes of you to turn it into hell for the people who toil here every day. Look, I don't know who you are, but Clint slowly pulled his business card out of his worn jacket pocket and dropped it on the table. The sound of the card hitting the wood surface sounded like a gunshot in the silence that followed. Now you know, and believe me, son, what happens next, you will remember for the rest of your life. The young waitress, still with traces of tears on her face, froze at the kitchen door, not believing her eyes. At that moment, no one suspected that the life of each of them was about to change forever. The most interesting part is coming. Stay with us to find out how it all ends. In the meantime, like and subscribe to the channel so you don't lose it. Clint Eastwood, owner of the Western Sunrise chain of 13 restaurants across the country, sat in his spacious office, turning over a profit and loss statement. His gray hair was neatly combed back, and his face was lined with deep wrinkles from years spent under the blazing sun and biting winds. But his eyes were as sharp as an eagle's, watching its prey from above. Over the course of 30 years, Clint had built his empire from scratch, turning one humble roadside diner into a thriving chain. He was proud of what he had created, places where families could come not only to eat, but to feel at home. But lately, something had changed. Mr. Eastwood, his assistant Janet's voice broke the silence of the office. 3 more complaints have been received from customers at the Oakville diner. That's the 7th this week. Clint slowly placed the report on the table and looked at Janet with a look that would make many in the office cringe. But not her. 15 years of work had made her accustomed to those steely eyes. What this time? The voice sounded like gravel under the wheels of an old pickup truck. Rude staff, long waits, cold food, Janet listed. And the cook quit again. 3rd in 2 months. Clint leaned back in his chair, his face unreadable. He remembered his regional manager, Frank, assuring him only a week ago that the problems in Oakville were temporary, adapting the new staff. But Clint's instincts, which had never failed him in all these years, said otherwise. Janet, he said after a long pause, cancel all my appointments for tomorrow and the day after, and find me the shabbiest clothes you can. Janet raised an eyebrow but nodded. She knew from years of working with Clint that when he made up his mind, nothing would stop him. Are you going to Oakville? She asked, already knowing the answer. It's time to see for yourself what's going on in my house. Clint stood up, his tall frame casting a long shadow across the office floor. The next morning, no one would have recognized the unshaven man in the worn leather jacket, faded jeans and old cowboy boots as the legendary Clint Eastwood. Gray stubble and a tattered baseball cap completed the image. Even his voice had changed. He spoke more quietly, with a slight southern accent that he had in his youth, but which he had almost gotten rid of as he climbed the career ladder. Oakville greeted him with gray skies and a cool breeze. The small town was 200 miles from headquarters, far enough away that none of the diner's employees would recognize him. Most of them had never seen the boss in person, only his pictures in corporate brochures. Clint parked his nondescript rental pickup in the parking lot of the Western Sunrise Diner and sat for a moment, watching. The outside of the building looked decent, fresh paint, clean windows, a bright sign with the signature Rising Sun logo. But the concrete out front was cracked, and several of the streetlights were out. Little things like that were things Clint noticed instantly. They spoke volumes. It was early lunchtime, and the diner was filling up. Clint took a deep breath, pulled his baseball cap down low, and stepped out of the car. As he stepped inside, he smelled a familiar aroma: fried bacon, fresh coffee, homemade apple pie. These were the smells he had smelled all his life. They were the smells of home. Looking around, Clint noticed that the interior was a little more worn than it should have been. The leather upholstery on some of the couches was cracked, a couple of the tables were slightly wobbly, and there was a dark stain on the carpet in the corner. Nothing catastrophic, but definitely below the standards he set for his establishments. Good afternoon. Welcome to Western Dawn. A young waitress with a name tag that said Megan approached him. Her voice was friendly, but Clint immediately noticed the signs of fatigue, the faint dark circles under her eyes, the tenseness of her shoulders, the forced smile that didn't reach her eyes. A table for one, please, Clint said, deliberately avoiding direct eye contact. Sure, come on in. Megan led him to a corner table by the window. Would you like to start with a drink? Just coffee, black, he replied, sitting down and quietly assessing the situation. As Megan walked away, Clint had a chance to watch. She moved between tables with practiced efficiency, but there was a weariness to every movement. The other waitresses, there were 2, were no better. One, an older one, limped, and the other rubbed her back constantly when she thought no one was looking. Megan returned with a steaming cup of coffee. "Ready to order?" she asked, taking out a notepad. "A signature burger with fries," Clint replied, watching her reaction carefully. Megan wrote down the order and smiled, a genuine smile now. "Great choice. Our chef, Connor, makes the best burgers around." This caught Clint's attention. The reports had indicated high turnover, especially among the cooks. "How long has Connor been with you?" he asked casually. A shadow passed over Megan's face. "Only 3 months, but he's the only one who does everything right." She glanced quickly toward the kitchen, as if afraid she'd be overheard. "Your order will be ready in a few minutes." Clint nodded and took a sip of his coffee, noting that it was excellent, hot and strong, just the way it should be. At least the standards for quality were maintained here. While he waited for his order, Clint watched the customers. A family with 2 small children looked disappointed, the parents constantly checking their watches. A couple of older people at the window looked at the menu with disapproval, and a group of teenagers loudly complained about the cold drinks. Suddenly, a loud male voice came from the kitchen. "Megan, where the hell are you? The orders are piling up." Megan, who was pouring coffee for an elderly couple at the time, winced. Her hands shook, and a few drops of coffee spilled onto the table. "Sorry," she muttered, quickly wiping the stain and hurried toward the kitchen. Clint tensed. That tone was unacceptable in his establishments. It was the first rule he had established when he started the business. Respect for employees and customers came first. Through the half-open kitchen door, he saw a middle-aged man in a stained apron, stocky and red-faced with anger. He appeared to be the shift manager. He was looming over Megan, pointing a finger at her face as she tried to explain the situation. "I don't want to hear excuses." His voice was loud enough to reach the tables in the hall. "If you can't handle it, there are 10 people who want to take your place." Clint watched as Megan's shoulders slumped and her head hung. She nodded and quickly grabbed the finished orders to take to the customers. Behind the manager, Clint noticed a young cook, a skinny guy with a worried expression. He worked quickly and efficiently, flipping burgers while preparing other dishes. This must be the Connor Megan had mentioned. As Megan passed his table, Clint noticed that her eyes were shining with suppressed tears. She blinked rapidly, trying to hide her emotions, but it was too late. He saw. A few minutes later, she brought his order. The burger looked delicious. The fries were golden and crispy. "Bon appetit," she said quietly, avoiding his gaze. "Thank you, Megan," Clint replied, using her first name deliberately. She looked at him in surprise, and for a moment their eyes met. There was weariness in her gaze, disappointment, and something else. Hope? Or just desperation? Clint took a bite of the burger and was pleasantly surprised. The meat was cooked to perfection. The spices were perfect. The bun was fresh and soft. This Connor really knew his stuff. As Clint ate, the tension in the diner grew. The manager, his name tag read Rick, was coming out of the kitchen, checking tables and occasionally making critical comments about the waitresses. His manner was brusque, almost rude, and Clint could see the customers exchanging nervous glances. A family with children who were waiting for their order finally lost patience. The father of the family called Megan over. "We've been waiting for 40 minutes, he said, trying to sound calm, but there was irritation in his voice. "The children are hungry and we still have 2 hours to go." Megan turned pale. "I'm so sorry, sir. I'll check your order right away." She hurried to the kitchen but was met with another angry shout from Rick. A minute later she returned, looking even more depressed. "Your order will be ready in 5 minutes, she said quietly. "As an apology, desserts for the whole family are on the house." The man chuckled but nodded. His wife smiled gratefully at Megan. Clint watched as Megan continued to work despite the obvious stress. As she passed, he noticed her hands were shaking. "Is everything okay?" he asked when she came over to refill his coffee. Megan tried to smile, but it came out unconvincingly. "Of course, sir. Just a little bit of a mess in the kitchen." Clint nodded, not wanting to push her. But when she turned away, he heard a muffled sob. Megan quickly covered her mouth with her hand and hurried toward the back room. Without thinking, Clint stood up and followed her. He knew he was trespassing, but he couldn't stay away. In the narrow hallway leading to the restrooms and storage area, Megan leaned against the wall, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs. She didn't notice Clint, who had stopped a few feet away from her. "I can't do this anymore," she whispered to herself. "I just can't do this anymore." At that moment, the kitchen door swung open and Rick appeared. He grimaced when he saw Megan crying. "Are you serious? Crying during your shift?" His voice was full of contempt. "We have a room full of customers and you're here sniveling? Pull yourself together or pack your things." Clint felt the anger building inside him, slowly but surely. This man, this Rick, was trampling everything Clint had spent years building. He wasn't just destroying a business. He was destroying the family that was supposed to be the Western Dawn crew. Are you hard of hearing? Clint's voice sounded like a whip crack. Both Rick and Megan turned sharply, not noticing his approach. Excuse me? Rick frowned, looking Clint over. I asked if you had trouble hearing, Clint repeated, stepping forward. Because I can clearly hear someone who works for you saying she can't do it anymore. And instead of supporting her, you're telling her to quit? Look, buddy. Rick sat up straight, his face starting to turn red. This is none of your business. You're a client, and I'm asking you to get back in the room. Clint didn't move, his eyes cold and hard, never leaving Rick's face. Megan, he said calmly, not looking at the girl. How many hours have you been working today without a break? Megan hesitated, looking from Clint to Rick. Don't answer him, Rick said sharply. It's not his. 7 o'clock, Megan said quietly, wiping away tears. I got here at 6 in the morning. And how many breaks did you have during that time? Clint continued. Megan looked down. None. Clint slowly turned his gaze to Rick, and Rick involuntarily took a step back. Are you familiar with labor laws? Look, we're short on staff, and that's not an answer. Clint took another step forward. Your employee is working 7 hours straight. That's against the law, not to mention basic humanity. Connor emerged from the kitchen, drawn by the sounds of conflict. He looked at the scene before him in confusion. What's going on? He asked uncertainly. Nothing, Rick snapped. Get back in the kitchen. Megan? Connor ignored the order, turning to his colleague. Are you okay? I'm fine, Connor. Megan tried to smile, but her lips trembled. Really? No, she's not okay, Clint said, not taking his eyes off Rick. And you know it. Rick crossed his arms over his chest, trying to look confident, but Clint saw him swallow nervously. Who the hell are you? He hissed. Some kind of justice crusader? A champion of the oppressed? This is a diner, not a charity. We're a business. I have a business too, Clint replied calmly. And I know that real business is built on respect, for customers and for employees. Rick snorted. Sure, tell that to the owners who demand profits every quarter and haven't been here in 2 years. The words hit Clint harder than he expected. Had he really become so distant from his own establishments? From the people who made his dream a reality day after day? Do you have any idea what these people go through? Clint's voice cut through the air like a knife. His eyes, cold and piercing, never left the manager's pale face. I didn't build this empire for the likes of you to turn it into hell for the people who toil here every day. Look, I don't know who you are, but Clint slowly pulled his business card out of his worn jacket pocket and dropped it on the table. The sound of the card hitting the wood surface sounded like a gunshot in the silence that followed. Now you know. And believe me, son, what happens next, you will remember for the rest of your life. Rick picked up the card with trembling fingers, his eyes widening as he read the name. Clint Eastwood, he muttered, his face white as chalk. The owner? Yeah, Clint nodded. The same owner who demands profits every quarter, but never shows up. Megan and Connor froze in disbelief. The atmosphere in the narrow hallway became so tense that it seemed you could cut it with a knife. Sir, I didn't know, Rick began to mumble, his voice a pitiful squeak. If I'd known you, if you knew I was coming, would you have acted differently? Clint interrupted. And that's supposed to make me feel better? That you can pretend to be a decent person when you think the boss is watching? Rick opened and closed his mouth like a fish out of water, at a loss for words. Megan, Clint turned to the girl, his voice softening. Go and take a break right now. 15 minutes, no less. Eat something, drink some water. But the clients, she began, confused. Connor, Clint looked over at the young cook. Can you help with the service in the dining room while Megan takes a break? Connor straightened up and nodded. Yes, sir, of course. But, Rick tried to interject. And you, Clint turned to him, his voice cold as steel again. You and I are going to go to your office now and have a very, very serious talk. Rick swallowed and nodded, completely broken. At that moment, a couple of customers came out into the hallway, heading for the toilets. Seeing the tense scene, they hesitated. It's okay, Connor said quickly, forcing a smile. Just a little work meeting. Once the customers had disappeared behind the restroom door, Clint took control of the situation again. Megan, take a break. Now. Connor, you have the room for 15 minutes. Rick, follow me. No one dared to object. In the manager's cramped office, Rick nervously fiddled with the edges of his apron as Clint looked around. The room was small and cluttered. His desk was covered in papers, and the walls were covered with shift schedules and financial reports, most of which looked out of date. How long have you been the manager of this place? Clint asked without sitting down. 2 years and 3 months, sir, Rick replied, his voice cracking. I was promoted from assistant manager. And who promoted you? Frank Dawson, my regional manager? Yes, sir. Clint nodded, making a mental note. Frank deserved a serious talk, too. Turnover is up 80% in the last 2 years, Clint said, glancing at the chart on the wall. 3 cooks in 2 months, 5 waitresses in 6 months. Customer satisfaction is down 30%. What do you think? It's hard to find good workers these days, Rick muttered, not looking up. Young people don't want to work. Clint looked at him with barely concealed contempt. Megan's working? Connor's working? I've seen them work hard. The problem isn't them. The problem is you. Rick looked up, indignation flashing in his eyes. Look, I'm doing my best. We're constantly understaffed. The budget is tight. The equipment is old. And the regional office is demanding more and more profit. How am I supposed to? Don't pass the buck, Clint snapped. I've seen the way you talk to your employees. I've seen you belittle them in front of customers. I've seen you make a girl cry and then threaten to fire her for crying. This isn't about budgets or equipment. This is about humanity. Rick remained silent, his head down. Show me the shift schedule, Clint demanded. Rick pulled a folder out of the stack of papers and handed it over. Clint quickly flipped through the documents, his face growing increasingly grim. Megan works 6 days a week, 10 to 12 hours. No overtime, no weekend pay. That's a violation of labor laws. She asked for extra shifts. Rick tried to justify himself. She needs money for school. And you used that to squeeze everything you could out of her without even respecting basic employee rights. Clint slammed the folder shut. And Connor? 20 days without a day off. He's new. He needs to prove. Shut up. Clint raised his hand. Just shut up. Rick closed his mouth, his face covered in sweat. I built this company to create places where people feel at home. Clint's voice was quiet, but every word was a death sentence. Not just the customers, but the employees. You turned my dream into a nightmare. Sir, I can change. I can make it all right, Rick began to plead. Give me another chance. Clint looked at him for a long time before answering. No. One word, but it sounded like a shot. You're fired, Rick. Right now, pack your things and leave. You can't just... Rick began, but stopped short when he saw the look on Clint's face. Yes, sir. And one more thing, Clint added as Rick turned back to his desk. If I find out you tried to take it out on Megan or Connor, if you said one hurtful word to them before you left, I will haunt you for the rest of your life. Is that understood? Rick nodded, his face deathly pale. You have 15 minutes. Clint stood in the middle of his diner, surrounded by curious glances from customers. The news of his identity had spread like wildfire. Employees looked at him with a mixture of awe and fear, and customers whispered, furtively snapping photos on their phones. Rick, head down, walked quickly across the room to the exit, avoiding eye contact with anyone. The door slammed behind him with a dull thud, the final chord of his career at Western Dawn. Mr. Eastwood, Megan walked up to him, still not believing her eyes. I don't understand. Why are you here? Why today? Clint looked at the young woman, whose face, despite its tiredness, now glowed with hope. Because I've been away from where I should have been for too long, he replied. His voice, deep and husky, made several patrons turn around. Sometimes you have to see for yourself. But what now? Connor asked, peeking out from the kitchen. We don't have a manager. There's half a dozen orders in line, and... He trailed off, unsure how to continue. Clint took off his tattered jacket and hung it over the back of a chair. Now, he said, rolling up his shirt sleeves, we're working. Connor, get back to the kitchen. Megan, gather everyone together for 5 minutes. While Megan was gathering the small staff for the shift, 2 more waitresses, a dishwasher, and a cleaning lady, Clint approached the family who were still waiting for their order. Good afternoon, he said, and something in his manner made the father of the family sit up straight. I apologize for the delay. Your order will be ready in 7 minutes. In the meantime, allow me to treat your children to some milkshakes. Are you really the owner of this place? The mother asked, bouncing the baby on her lap. Yes, ma'am, Clint nodded. And I promise you'll see what a real Western Dawn is all about today. When the staff gathered in the corner of the room, there were only 6 of them. A pitiful excuse for a team that should have been serving an establishment of this size. No wonder they all looked exhausted. My name is Clint Eastwood, he began without preamble. 30 years ago, I opened the first Western Dawn diner with one idea, to create a place where people come not only to eat, but to feel at home. A place where everyone from the dishwasher to the customer feels respected. He glanced at their faces, tired but attentive. Today I saw how far we have strayed from that idea, and for that I ask your forgiveness. Maria, one of the older waitresses, blinked in surprise. Are you asking us for forgiveness? Yeah, Clint nodded. This is my company. I let people like Rick run it without checking what was really going on. That's my mistake." There was silence. No one expected such a confession from the legendary owner. "But now is not the time for long talk," Clint continued. "We have a room full of hungry people. Here's what we'll do. I'll be your manager today. Megan, you're in charge of the room. Connor, you're in charge of the kitchen. The rest of you follow their instructions, and tomorrow we'll meet here an hour before we open and figure out how to move forward." "What about the regional manager?" asked Anna, the youngest of the waitresses. "Mr. Dawson said that if we complained, then—" "Forget what Dawson said," Clint interrupted. "Starting tomorrow, things will be different here. I promise you that." They parted wary, but with a glimmer of hope in their eyes. Clint headed for the kitchen, where Connor was trying to deal with the backlog of orders. "Need help?" Clint asked, walking up to the stove. Connor looked at him in surprise. "You can cook?" Clint grinned, the lines around his eyes deepening. "Son, I started out as a line cook at a burger joint on Route 66. Flipped burgers for 20 years before I opened my own business." He took the spatula from the young chef's hands and, with a professional movement, turned over 4 cutlets at once. "Show me what you have in line." The next few hours flowed into a tense but oddly satisfying flow of work. Clint helped out in the kitchen, occasionally stepping out into the dining room to check on the situation, and even personally apologizing to a few customers for delays. Megan, now empowered, was transformed before her eyes. Her movements became more confident, her voice firmer, and her eyes began to sparkle. As the evening wore on, the atmosphere in the diner changed as the traffic began to dwindle. The staff were still exhausted, but there was now energy in their movements. They worked as a team, and the results were obvious. Customers left satisfied, many leaving generous tips and expressing gratitude for the service. At 9 o'clock, Clint gathered everyone after closing time. They sat at a large table in an empty room, tired but with a sense of accomplishment. "You've shown what you can do today," Clint said, looking at each of us in turn. "And this is just the beginning." He took a checkbook out of his pocket, wrote out a check, and put it on the table. "This is a bonus to each of you for today. You deserve it." Maria took the check and gasped. The amount was more than she earned in a week. "Mr. Eastwood, that's too generous." "That's fair," Clint snapped. "You've been working under unbearable conditions for the last few months and still stayed. That says more about your character than any words could." "What's tomorrow?" asked Jose, the dishwasher, whose accent marked him as a Mexican immigrant. "Who's the new manager?" Clint looked at the team thoughtfully. "Tomorrow, I'll stay here, and the day after tomorrow, too. Until we find a worthy person." He turned his gaze to Connor. "Are you ready to take on more responsibility?" The young cook straightened up. "In what sense, sir?" "I've seen how you work, how you organize the process, how you help others, even when you yourself are swamped with work. These are the qualities of a leader." "But I've only been with the company for 3 months, Connor countered, though something like pride flashed in his eyes. "Sometimes 3 months is more telling than 3 years, Clint replied. "I want you to become a sous chef, with a corresponding raise, of course." Connor nodded, stunned, at a loss for words. "And you, Megan?" Clint turned to the girl, who still couldn't believe what was happening. "How about the position of head waitress?" Megan faltered, her eyes filling with tears, but this time not from despair but from gratitude. "I won't let you down, Mr. Eastwood." "I know," he nodded. "Now go home. Get some rest. A new chapter begins tomorrow." After everyone had left, Clint was left alone in the quiet diner. He walked slowly around the place, noting anything that needed repair or replacement. Cracked tiles, worn upholstery, outdated equipment. Year after year, he'd received reports that everything was fine, when in reality, his creation was slowly deteriorating. Sitting down at a corner table with a cup of coffee, Clint took out his phone and dialed a number. "Janet, it's me. Cancel all my appointments for the next week. Yes, I'm staying in Oakville. And also, prepare the paperwork to fire Frank Dawson. We've been turning a blind eye for too long." The next morning started at 5 o'clock for Clint. He arrived at the diner well before opening time and found Jose already there, cleaning up the front area. "Buenos dias, Jose," Clint greeted. "Do you always come this early?" "Si, Senor Eastwood." The man nodded. "I like it clean before opening." Clint looked closely at the dishwasher, whose calloused hands and lined face spoke of years of hard labor. "How long have you been working here, Jose?" 5 years, sir, since I came from Chihuahua." "And always a dishwasher?" Jose shrugged. "I started as a prep cook, but the previous manager, he said the customers didn't like my accent, that it would be better if I was in the kitchen where I couldn't be seen." Clint felt the anger rising inside him again, but he held it in. "Do you ever want to get back to cooking?" Jose's eyes lit up. "Oh, see," My abuela, my grandmother, taught me how to cook traditional Mexican dishes. I even suggested expanding the menu, but no one was listening to you, Clint finished for him. Well, now I'm listening. Tell me your ideas. When the rest of the staff began to arrive, they found an unusual sight. The legendary Clint Eastwood in the dishwasher, Jose, hunched over a notepad, discussing recipes and possible specials. By 6:30, the entire team had assembled in the room. Clint noticed that they were earlier than expected, and everyone looked rested and ready to work. Good morning, he began. Before we open, I want to tell you about some changes. He took several documents out of the folder and handed them out. First, a new schedule. No one works more than 8 hours a day without overtime. No one works more than 5 days in a row without a day off. Everyone will have at least 2 paid breaks per shift. The staff's faces lit up as they looked through the papers. Secondly, a new payment system. Base rates have been increased by 20%, plus bonuses for seniority and excellent service. Maria pressed her hand to her mouth, her eyes shining with tears. Third, Clint pointed at Jose, our Jose is returning to work in the kitchen. Starting today, he'll be an assistant cook under Connor, and we're starting an experiment with new dishes. Jose smiled shyly as everyone looked at him. And finally, Clint put his hand on Megan's shoulder, we're starting the search for a new manager. But until then, Megan will be acting as deputy manager. I'll be here every day, supervising and helping, but she'll be making the major maintenance decisions. Megan turned pale. Mr. Eastwood, I'm not sure I can handle this. I'm sure, Clint said firmly. I've seen the way you work, the way you solve problems, the way you care about your clients and your colleagues. That's exactly what Western Dawn needs. What if I'm wrong? She asked quietly. Then you'll fix it and move on. Clint looked her straight in the eye. No one expects perfection, Megan. Just honesty, caring, and a desire to be better. The girl took a deep breath and nodded, straightening her shoulders. Okay, I'll do my best. I don't ask for more, Clint smiled. The morning shift began with a surprise. A small line had already formed outside the diner. The news that Clint Eastwood himself was in the establishment spread through the town like wildfire. It looks like we're in for a busy morning, Megan said, watching as people filled the room. Ready? The team responded with unanimous nods, and the work began to boil. Clint moved back and forth between the kitchen and the dining room, helping where needed, but mostly observing. He was pleased with how well the team worked together, how confidently Megan managed the service, how Connor and Jose coordinated the kitchen. Around noon, the doors of the diner opened, and a massive man in an expensive suit walked in. His face was red with anger, and his clenched fists indicated extreme irritation. Where's Eastwood? He asked loudly, ignoring Anna's greeting as she approached him. I need Clint Eastwood. Clint, who was helping with orders in the kitchen, heard a familiar voice and walked out into the room, wiping his hands on a towel as he went. Frank, he said calmly, I didn't expect to see you so soon. Frank Dawson, the regional manager in charge of 5 Western Dawn locations, including the Oakville one, looked like he was about to explode. What the hell is going on, Clint? I get a call from your secretary telling me you're firing Rick, the best manager in my region, without my approval. And then I find out you're standing behind the register like a business owner who cares about his business? Clint finished for him, and several of the customers chuckled quietly. Frank glanced around the crowded room and lowered his voice, though his anger remained. Let's discuss this in the office, not in front of the staff and clients. Clint nodded. That makes sense. Megan, can you handle it without me for 20 minutes? Of course, Mr. Eastwood, she replied confidently, casting a wary glance at Frank. In the office that had belonged to Rick only yesterday, Frank did not sit down. He paced the cramped space while Clint settled himself quietly behind the desk. You're undermining my authority, Clint, Frank began. I'm responsible for this region, these diners. You can't just come in and start changing everything without consulting me. I can, Clint replied simply, and I will, because what I saw here is unacceptable. What exactly did you see? Frank crossed his arms. Rick kept this place afloat in a tough economy. Yeah, he's hard on his staff. Yeah, he's tough. But he made his profit target every quarter, which is what you wanted. At any cost. Clint leaned forward. Even if that cost is exhausted employees working without breaks or overtime, even if it's unhappy customers who never come back, even if it's the destruction of everything I've spent 30 years building? Frank snorted. Don't be dramatic. Business is business. You can't be soft these days. I never said anything about softness, Clint's voice hardened. I said principles. What makes Western Dawn special? Principles don't pay the bills, Clint. It's easy for you to say that from your office on the top floor. But I'm here in the real world, where competition is killing restaurants every day. Clint rose slowly, and although Frank was half a head taller and broader in the shoulders, it was he who instinctively took a step back. You know what I was doing yesterday, Frank? Standing in the kitchen, flipping burgers. You know why? Because your best manager created such an environment that qualified cooks quit one after another. And it was only thanks to Connor, who worked 7 days a week, that the kitchen was functioning at all. Clint took a step forward. You know what I learned? That the waitresses worked 12-hour shifts without a break. That Jose, a trained cook, was sent to wash dishes only because he had a Mexican accent. That the employees were afraid of getting sick because Rick threatened to fire anyone who called in sick. One more step. And you know who's responsible for this? Not just Rick. You, Frank. You should have been paying attention to what was going on in your area. You should have known that your diners were violating labor laws, that the quality of service was declining, that employees were quitting one after another. Frank turned pale but still tried to defend himself. I can't be everywhere at once, Clint. I have 5 diners to manage, and I have to— 6, Clint interrupted. You had 6 diners. Now you have 5. The Oakville one is coming under my direct control, and I'll be personally inspecting each of the remaining ones in the coming weeks. The blood drained from Frank's face. You're taking the diner away from me? You can't do that. I have a contract, which gives me the authority to reallocate assets at any time. Clint was unforgiving. You're still the regional manager, Frank, for now. But given what I've seen here so far, your position is very precarious. That's not fair, Frank exploded. You come for one day and think you've got it all figured out? I've got dozens of reports that show— The reports, Clint said, gesturing toward the stacks of papers on his desk. I saw the reports too, and they said everything was fine. But you know what I've learned in 30 years in business? You can't just trust the numbers. You have to see the people. You have to hear their stories. You have to feel the atmosphere of the place. He walked towards the door, making it clear that the conversation was over. You have a choice, Frank. Either you realize that my principles are not just words in a corporate brochure and start working accordingly, or you look for a new job. Decide. After Frank left, red with rage but silent, Clint returned to the room where he noticed Megan glancing nervously in his direction. Is everything okay? She asked, coming up to him with the coffee pot. Mr. Dawson seemed upset. It'll be fine, Clint replied with a slight smile. Sometimes people need to be reminded that business isn't just about numbers on a report card. The day continued at a frantic pace. News of Clint Eastwood's presence attracted more and more customers, and by evening, the diner was packed. But despite the tension, the team worked together as a team. Jose, back at the stove, was winning over customers with his signature Mexican-inflected dishes. Connor, more focused than ever, ran the kitchen with an efficiency that would make a 5-star chef jealous. And Megan seemed born to be a manager. She solved problems before they arose, anticipated customers' needs, and supported the team with just a look or a smile. After closing, when the last customer had left and the tables had been wiped down, Clint gathered the team in the center of the room. 2 days, and he began. It's only been 2 days, and any of you can tell the difference yet? I've never seen so many happy customers, Maria replied. And such tips. The kitchen is finally working properly, Connor nodded. It's a lot easier with Jose. What about you? Clint asked. Do you feel any difference? Si, senor, Jose smiled shyly. I feel like a cook again. A real cook. I don't dread coming to work anymore, Anna said quietly. I don't count the minutes until the end of my shift. Clint turned to Megan, who stood a little to the side, tired but with a sparkle in her eyes. And you, Megan, how do you feel? She thought for a moment, choosing her words. I feel proud, she finally said. Proud to work here. Proud to do what we do. Proud to be what Western Dawn can become. Clint nodded, something like fatherly pride flickering in his eyes. That's exactly what I wanted to hear, he said, because I have a proposition. Everyone froze in anticipation. I'm staying in Oakville for a few more days. I'll be watching, helping, guiding, but soon I'll have to go back to headquarters, and this diner will need a permanent manager. He looked at Megan. I'm offering this position to you, Megan, officially, with full training, support, and of course, a salary to match. There was silence in the room. Megan froze, her eyes wide. Me? But I've never managed. I have no experience. You've got it all. Clint was unwavering. You know this place. You know the people. You care about them, the customers and the team. And most importantly, you understand what Western Dawn means. Megan took a deep breath. tears welling up in her eyes. But what if I can't handle it? You're not alone, Clint said softly. You have a team. You have Connor to be your assistant. And you have me, maybe not here physically, but always a phone call away. Connor stepped forward and stood next to Megan. I will support you, he said with confidence in his voice. We all will. The rest of the team nodded, surrounding Megan. Jose put his hand on her shoulder, Maria put her arm around her waist, and Anna just looked at her adoringly. See? Clint smiled, his stern face softening. Family. That's what Western Dawn is all about. Not just a diner, family. Megan couldn't hold back the tears any longer. They started to flow down her cheeks, but they were tears of joy, relief, and gratitude. I agree, she said at last, her voice shaking but with a new strength. I'll be a manager, and I promise I'll never forget what you taught me. Clint extended his hand, and Megan shook it firmly. There was more to the handshake than a business agreement. It was a contract, sealed not with paper, but with hearts. Welcome to the family, Manager Megan, Clint said, and the entire team burst into applause. On his last day in Oakville, Clint arrived at the diner at dawn. He stood in the parking lot, watching the first rays of sunlight paint the sky orange and pink, the colors of the Western Dawn logo. A lot has changed in the last few days. The diner received new kitchen equipment. The sofas were reupholstered, the floors were polished to a shine, and the menu was updated to include several of Jose's signature dishes that were already becoming hits with regulars. But the biggest change wasn't in the decor or the menu. It was in the people. Megan blossomed as a manager, her natural caring for others given structure and purpose. Connor, now officially the head chef, unleashed his creativity by experimenting with new recipes. Jose wore his new sous chef uniform proudly and taught the others how to make authentic Mexican salsa. Even the youngest members of the team had changed, walking with their heads held high, knowing their work was appreciated. Clint walked into the diner where Megan was already preparing everything for opening. An early bird, he remarked with a smile. Learning from the best, she replied, looking up from checking the coffee machine. I couldn't wait to start the day. I remember that feeling, Clint nodded. 30 years ago, I was the same way. Every morning I couldn't wait to open the doors of my first diner. They sat down at a corner table, the same one where Clint had sat on the first day, watching the proceedings in the hall. I'm leaving this evening, he said, sipping freshly brewed coffee. There are other eateries that need my attention. Megan nodded, her face turning serious. I understand, and I'm ready, Mr. Eastwood. Really? I know, he looked into her eyes. But I want you to know that what you've done here, the way you've changed this place in just a few days, it's impressive. And I'm not one to be impressed easily. Megan blushed slightly at the praise. It's not just me. You gave us a chance. You believed in us when no one else did. Sometimes people just need to be reminded what they're capable of. Clint shrugged. They do the rest on their own. They were silent for a moment, enjoying the quiet moment before the start of the workday. There's one more thing, Clint finally said, pulling an envelope from his inside jacket pocket. I told you I was going to check out every diner in Frank's region, and I'll keep my word, but I can't be everywhere at once. He placed the envelope on the table and pushed it towards Megan. What is this? She asked without touching the envelope. Your future, if you accept it. Megan hesitantly took the envelope and opened it. Inside was an official document on Western Dawn letterhead. She quickly scanned the text, and her eyebrows shot up. This is a promotion? Regional manager? Me? Clint nodded. Not right away, of course. First, you have to get this diner on its feet. Show that your success is not a fluke. Then after 3 months, you'll start gradually taking control of other places in the area. One at a time, and eventually you'll replace Frank. But I never thought about that career. I just wanted to save money for college and showed a talent that can't be ignored, Clint finished for her. Listen, Megan, Western Dawn needs people who understand its soul, who see people, not just profits. You're that person. Megan looked at the document, her hands shaking slightly. What if I refuse? What if I say I want to stay here in Oakville? Then you will remain the manager of this diner with my full blessing, Clint replied simply. It's your choice, Megan. I will never force you to do anything you don't want to do. She took a deep breath, her thoughts clearly torn between ambitions she had never dared to dream of and the comfort of a familiar place. Can I think about it? Discuss it with Connor and the others? Of course, Clint smiled. The family will support whatever you decide. At that moment, the front door opened and Connor and Jose walked in, animatedly discussing some new recipe. Seeing Clint and Megan at the table, they waved and headed into the kitchen. giving them a chance to finish their conversation. You've changed our lives, Megan said quietly, watching them go. In just a few days, you've changed everything. I can't thank you enough. Clint shook his head. Don't thank me. Just keep doing what you're doing. Take care of people, your team and your customers. Remember, Western Dawn is more than just a place to eat. It's a home away from home. He finished his coffee and stood up, his tall figure casting a long shadow in the morning light. And who knows, maybe one day you'll own your own chain of fast food restaurants. Megan laughed, but there was no mockery in her laughter, only surprise at the suddenly opened possibilities. One step at a time, Mr. Eastwood. First, I have to survive today's lunch rush. That's the right attitude, Clint nodded approvingly. Day after day, decision after decision. That's how you build not only a business, but a life. He started to leave, but stopped at the door and looked back. The Western Dawn Diner was shining in the morning light, clean, updated, ready for the day. So were the people who worked there. You know, Megan, Clint said, his voice becoming thoughtful. When I was starting out, someone told me that true success isn't measured by the money in your bank account, but by the smiles on the faces of the people who work with you and the people who come back to you again and again. He smiled, a rare but genuine smile that lit up his usually stern face. By these standards, you are already very successful. And with that, the legendary Clint Eastwood walked out the door, squinting in the bright morning sun. He wasn't just leaving behind a renovated diner. He was leaving behind a renewed dream, a new family, and a legacy that would live on long after he left. But the story of Western Dawn was just beginning, and Megan, standing in the doorway and watching Clint climb into his truck, knew that part of the story was now hers. A new chapter, new possibilities, new horizons, like the dawn that gave this special place its name. She took a deep breath, turned, and walked back into the diner where her family waited. Well, guys, she said with a smile full of confidence and hope, let's show him what we can really do.